Dark Souls is a game that spawned an entire genre in gaming. Its influence is felt in countless games, whether they took up the mantle of Souls-like or took inspiration in some other way. But part of this game's reputation is being stupidly difficult, and as someone who is a more casual gamer, this game's reputation has long scared me, and so I avoided it. I didn't even touch the Souls-like genre until about a year ago. Since then, I have gotten better at games, and a friend of mine loves Dark Souls. So he invited me to play with his guidance and, well, that was just enough for me to purchase the game and finally give it a try. For most of my videos, I like having some fun at games while also giving my honest opinions on its mechanics and gameplay, as well as bringing people through my entire run, or at least the highlights of it. But this will be a bit different. I want to say up front that I genuinely hated Dark Souls. From the beginning all the way to the end, I couldn't wait for the experience to be over. And so I want to change this video into a deeper look at the game as I try to understand why it's so popular. To do this, I will of course share my own experience, which will include my many complaints about the game, or at least I guess a few of them that I've narrowed it down to, but I also want to make clear that I'm not here to hate on the game, but to share my frustrations in the hopes of uncovering the hidden magic of Dark Souls. I also want to encourage the Get Good crowd to join me on a more critical look at the game rather than demand that everyone have the same time, devotion, and skill that you may have. Right from the start, I was seeking any way to make this experience easier, and so when I was presented with class options, I chose the mage.
I like sorcerers. I like Dragon School. Sorcerer.
And so I wanted to talk about the mage before anything else, as once it was chosen, I was more or less locked into it. Part of me chose it because I just love the magic class in most games, but I also heard that mage was easier to play than the others. Maybe I'm wrong about that and I could have kind of changed my class as I played, but I chose mage, so I wanted to stick to it. My experience with the game was likely much different than most people when they approach Dark Souls. The main reason being that my class was largely dependent on me being able to put distance between myself and the enemy. The mage class is given a starting spell, but only 30 charges of that spell.
Randomly kills guy who's just minding his own business. Yes, yes.
On top of this, each shot takes a second or two to be cast, meaning I often had to be very precise with my timing if I was going to hit my target without incurring damage myself. Dark Souls itself relies on the player having precise timing, but as a mage, I couldn't help but feel I was often dealt a bad hand.
Ah! Open the door! What if it's locked? No! How do you roll? It never said how to roll!
When there were hordes of enemies, the idea of being able to shoot off a single spell at just one of those targets went out the window immediately, forcing me to rely on my sword. The same could be said about many of the boss battles. Several of them never left a window large enough for me to fire off even my fastest spells. This fact meant that my magic was entirely useless, and the many levels I poured into upgrading it was rendered meaningless. And so I had to fight many bosses and battles with a sword.
I am fighting Spider.
Assuming I had not been a mage, then the levels I had gained, rather it would have gone into one of the stats that would increase my melee damage. And so the swordsman would obviously have a much greater advantage over me in close range combat. That much is understandable, but with many bosses never leaving a window large enough for me to even use my magic, I was left out to dry, slowly pecking away at a boss's health with my meager little sword, where a swordsman could have done just fine. On the flip side, there were bosses who left wide open windows for me to unleash my spells. The bosses that didn't leave open a window would actively charge the player at all times, but these bosses, who were easy for the mage, would linger and wait for me to approach them while slowly walking towards me. The Great Grey Wolf is a good example of this.
Okay, not very nice at the start.
A friend of mine who did run one of the melee builds struggled with this dog, while I took only a couple of tries.
What were you targeting? This stupid spell? Oh.
The reason being, as soon as you get close to him, he starts going crazy, but I didn't have to get close to him.
Sword has a lot less range than it looks like it should. Oh, that time it did.
There was also this magic I believe is called miracles that you can use by upgrading your faith stat, but seeing as to how intelligence upgraded the magic I already had, I didn't upgrade my faith hardly at all. There were even some cool spells I would have loved to use, but by the time I learned of their existence, I would have needed many more levels and hours upon hours of farming to use them. Part of me did want to upgrade faith, but because of the bosses and enemies who were hard to fight as a mage, I needed to add what levels I could into my strength rather than gamble on faith. I suppose I should mention that I did get a sword about halfway through that seemingly had damage that coordinated with my intelligence stat. To this day, I still have no idea if that means its damage scaled in the same way as a regular blade would, with strength, and it dealt okay damage, but at the point I reached the 4 lords, the damage output from it against bosses and larger enemies was laughably low. Maybe that'd be the same as a warrior, but I have my doubts. All of that to say that the mage had moments to shine, but also lots of moments where it functioned as a real handicap. This makes me wonder if being a warrior would have led to a better experience, though that alone wouldn't have made the game good in my view. I already talked about some of the ups and downs while playing as a mage, but now I need to talk about what is, in my mind, easily the biggest issue with this game. The bosses themselves were largely fine. There was some fun to be had in learning their patterns and figuring out how to take them out, but I was rarely ever allowed to actually do that. The problem with the bosses was rarely the boss itself, but rather the time it took to get to them. And I don't mean the need to go through a castle or what have you, unlocking the needed doors and pulling the right levers, but I mean reaching the boss room, dying, and then running back to the boss room for a rematch. Often this would include over a minute of mindlessly sprinting while praying the enemies you're running past don't get in a lucky hit. There are 2 bosses in particular that illustrate this point quite well. The first of these bosses is the Capra Demon, or as me and a friend of mine affectionately called it, the Capybara.
Capybara, 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 capybara.
The first time I walked into this boss room, I hadn't stood inside the arena for more than 2 seconds before the boss one-shot me. The white wall barrier had hardly even fallen, and by the time I realized there was a boss in the room, I was already dead.
Let's go on to easy boss. Be wary of boss. Thank you. These messages are great. Oh! Just like
there's just silence afterwards.
just the immediate once you enter. That's just the second you enter. Just yeah, okay.
Let me know when you would like some support.
This is, in and of itself, quite annoying, but there is also a long ways to travel before I can return to this room, and that road is covered with enemies. At this point in the game, I was still pretty new and wasn't sure what was expected of me. All I saw was a path to the boss room, and I had to find a way to reach it again. The problem was that there were assassins and these zombie dogs that made this task annoyingly difficult. Running past them was not an option, at least not for someone as new to the game as I was. When I attempted to do so, I would either get backstabbed by the assassins or run down by the dogs. And so I was forced to fight these foes over and over and over again, all the while praying I didn't get hit even once so I could save my Estus flask for the final battle and survive the first hit. This is the point where some people might simply say to get good. And I did improve my skills, but I think the people who say that don't seem to understand a lot of people really do have a certain skill ceiling they hit and can't surpass, nor do they understand that people like me are in fact still newbies and don't have hundreds of hours in the game yet, nor are interested in spending those hundreds of hours to, quote, get good.
I don't play MMOs if you can't tell.
And I in particular have never played a game even close to what Dark Souls is. Sure, I've played a Souls-like or 2, but these were fast and snappy and not designed with the player's suffering in mind. Dark Souls is slow and lumbering, and every input takes a second or more before you can use the next one. I struggled greatly and still struggle with how slow everything in Dark Souls is, and it was made worse by the fact I was forced down a gauntlet of enemies faster than I was. Worse yet, when I did occasionally make it to the Capra Demon, I would be killed by the first attack.
All right, boyos, here we go-os. Dodge, please. I have survived more than
heal.
I can't. I'm trying to run away and kill dog. The capybara, though, is here, and I don't like it. The stupid dog. If the dog would get away.
I really struggled with figuring out the boss's timing for that first swing, and learning the timing was made all the more difficult due to the enemy gauntlet I was forced down after each failure. In the end, I spent 3.5 hours on this one boss, and would have spent much more if my friend hadn't informed me of another route with far fewer enemies. This let me walk into the boss room once every 5 minutes or less rather than every half an hour, and so I was actually able to run the course of trial and error, and I eventually dodged the first attack, killed the Capra Demon's 2 dogs, and beat him first try.
Leroy Jenkins.
Hey, you dodged that correctly for the first time. All right, Thorben, take your meds.
I'm a little busy trying not to die. Good sir, please get into view so I can shoot you. Long distance. He's hogging the stairs. Okay. Yeah.
He got him?
I got him.
Thorben sold him.
First try.
Thorben sold his first boss.
Some might say they feel a great sense of accomplishment for overcoming a hurdle such as this, but I was actually furious. All I needed to do to take down the Capra Demon was a little practice, but due to the enemies in my way and the design of the game, I was never able to actually get that practice. I only entered the boss room maybe 10 times and beat him the first, well, technically second time that I didn't die to the first attack. Those 3.5 hours I spent to kill this boss, 99% of that was spent just getting to the boss room, and the other 1% actually fighting him, and most of that fighting wasn't even fighting, it was just dying immediately. And I hope that those who enjoy Dark Souls can understand how this would be frustrating, and maybe people who enjoy Dark Souls enjoy the fact that it is frustrating in this way. Maybe they get some sort of enjoyment from that frustration, but at the same time, that leaves people like me who don't enjoy that frustrating to scratch our heads and wonder why. I genuinely don't understand it, and it makes me wonder how fair it is to say that this is bad design, that they should have put the campfire right outside the boss room, or made the enemies easier, or some other step taken to allow people to go through. But the hardcore Dark Souls fans will probably say, get good, scrub, and will also just say that this is all part of the process. That process, I don't understand. This brings me to the second boss, the Bed of Chaos. This one, thankfully, did not have nearly as dangerous enemies on the road to the boss room. It just took absolutely forever to get to the boss itself, and when I did,
I'm surfing. I'm dancing surfing. Woohoo! Yeah. Hype train. Those guys like Cthulhu.
it rarely took more than 5 seconds before I died. The way this boss functions is that I have to destroy 3 things behind the main body. The first one was not a big deal at all. After attempting to fight him normally the first time only to die and realize there was something behind him, I managed to take out the first one of these 3 shields, I guess we'll call them, and that's when the battle became significantly more annoying. Now the ground would fall out from under my feet. It was always the same location, so I could remember where they were after a few failures, but the boss always swung his massive arms around and very often knocked me off the edge if I didn't walk off on my own accord already. For the life of me, I never figured out how to dodge those arms. My timing was either never right or it's actually impossible.
Oh, I just hit the dodge button.
Then there was the third and worst phase where you had to jump directly at the boss and then through the boss. This required me to jump over a pit and hope I remembered where the route below it was, while also not being hit by the boss's arms. If I delayed my approach until the arms were not attacking, I would be struck by some other attack. Entering this boss room, his pattern was never exactly the same, and because running straight for the ditch upon entry was what had worked before, I kept doing that until eventually I broke through and killed the thing inside, figuring I had just lowered the shields and would now have to fight the boss. But as it would turn out, the little bug I had killed down here was in fact the boss.
Attack. Wait, what the heck? What was that?
Hey, you got it.
Oh, that's
You
it?
see, I believed in you.
Oh.
This battle was maybe 40 minutes in total, which I have since been told isn't actually that long compared to many other players, but I walked away from the battle feeling displeased by how much time I had wasted just running to the boss room, only for the battle to be over in an instant. Both of these bosses could have been beaten in under 15 minutes easily, if only I had spawned outside the boss room door as opposed to far away. The Capra Demon was even worse due to the enemies being unavoidable, but even when I could run around the enemies, it was obnoxious, needing to spend the vast majority of my time running to the boss room and not actually fighting the boss. This is where my first major question comes to mind. See, I really want to understand why people enjoy this game. I really do, because there's so many people who have enjoyed it so much, and I hate it. I hate it with every fiber in my being, so I want to know. Clearly, there is a group that this is for, and I want to get it. Am I crazy for not enjoying the mindless running to a boss room over and over again? Now, not every game needs to spawn you outside the boss room, and not every game needs to allow you to fight a boss on endless repeat. But after running to these boss rooms so many times, I quickly became either numb or angry to the point where beating a boss was not some great victory, but a chore which was finally done. For many bosses, I enlisted the help of my friends who sometimes would just beat the boss for me. Some might argue this robbed me of experiencing that fulfillment and overcoming these obstacles, but this help was the only reason I didn't uninstall the game after the first hour. I want to say that I don't have the time to put into this game, that I do have a full-time job, and although I do make YouTube videos about these games, I still have to complete them at some point. But I don't think that's the main issue. It was as simple as the fact that I did not enjoy what I was doing, so when a boss felt insurmountable, I was quick to press the easy button, knowing that the only other option was to quit. I could have put tens or even hundreds of more hours in the hopes of eventually getting really good, but when a game isn't enjoyable, why would I be motivated to get good at it? And as I mentioned earlier, I do believe everyone has a certain skill ceiling when it comes to everything in life. Some people just can't get better at something than they already are. I've played the game Terraria for some 10 years now, and after running a Terraria YouTube channel for just over a year now, I've seen only a marginal increase in my skill at the game after putting in 1,000 or so more hours. And so, how does someone get past this initial skill gap? This frustration? Were the people who love this game kids who could dedicate entire days to playing the game? I only had time for maybe 1 4-hour sitting a week. Did the love for this game come from a sheer dedication to it? But even in the first hour of playing it, during my first sitting, I was already prepared to lay down the controller, uninstall, and pray for a refund. I do want to mention one boss who I did really enjoy above all the others before continuing, because I want to give some praise in this mostly negative video. There's a boss called Crossbreed Priscilla, who was easily my favorite boss as far as the battle's design is concerned. When the battle begins, she turns invisible, which is quite daunting, and when I was suddenly hit from behind, I was fearful of being wiped out by a boss who I never stood a chance of fighting back against. The only recourse I could think of was blindly firing off spells I had, which shot a spread of projectiles and hoped that I would hit the boss. After several misses, I spotted an outcropping that would allow me to force the boss into a hallway, assuming it followed me there. Either she wouldn't follow me and I would be safe, or she would, and I'd be able to determine whether she was invincible or just invisible. Doing this allowed me to hit and reveal her, which was great until she disappeared again. Now I was out of the spell and was confused until I noticed footprints were appearing in the snow. Sure enough, this was the boss, and now I knew how to detect her. From here, I was able to kill her on the first attempt, and my friend said that most people view her as one of the easiest bosses. Because even I could beat her first try, this is obviously true, but I also wished more of the bosses were like this. But not just that you could beat them in the first try, mind you. So many bosses took next to no damage when I attacked them, and so the battles would drag on, and because I'm still new, eventually I'd make a mistake and that'd get me killed no matter how well I knew the boss, and doing so little damage was quite discouraging. On top of that, the boss didn't immediately kill me. I could actually survive a few hits, allowing me the time to figure out what was happening and how to counteract it. There were also larger gaps between attacks so I could use my spells, and despite her attacks being generally similar to many other bosses, I found them far easier to read and dodge. Not every boss needs to be her, but this was one of the only times I felt accomplished because I was actually able to read this boss's attacks, figure out her special ability, and plan a countermeasure all in a single battle, rather than spending hours just getting to the boss room. That, on top of the fact that she gave me room to breathe so I could actually think about what I should do. One other thing I thought I should mention is Sense Fortress. Apparently a lot of people struggle with this thing, and I think GameRanks included it in one of the most annoying or difficult sections in video gaming history or whatever. Well, it took me maybe a half hour, and I never felt particularly frustrated by it. Sure, there were some annoying elements, but overall, this was a walk in the park compared to most of the bosses. I got outside and was rather confused as to why I'd heard so many people talk about how hard it is. Maybe I'm just better at the sort of gameplay required by this specific fortress? I don't know, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I had an easy time with something known for being difficult while struggling with just about everything else in the game. Another issue I had mad was just how slow everything was. My character moved slow, and yes, I paid attention to encumberment, though I think that stat is incredibly unclear as to what the numbers actually mean, but I move slow. The enemies move slow. Everything was slow. The arrows fired by skeletons were slow. And I think that this playstyle itself could have been another big factor into my own distaste for the game. I enjoy games that are quick and snappy, where an input does exactly what it's supposed to do in one frame, and in the very next frame, I can be on to the next input. But in Dark Souls, every move takes a second or more before I can do the next thing. This would often result in me button mashing because I wanted to dodge roll and then attack, but by the time the dodge roll was complete, the opening I had seen would be gone and I would be hit before my own attack ever got started. I never did adjust to the slowness of everything, and up to the end I was struggling with button mashing. It's not even just that there was a delay between the moment I pressed a button and the actual use of an attack. A delayed strike is one thing. Admittedly, I never play that style in any game because I'm not very good at that playstyle, but worse than that was the delay after an attack or dodge roll. I can't count the number of times I thought my attack or roll was completed, but there was still another millisecond before I could go into the next input. There was always a sense that my character was standing around like an idiot for a moment too long after every roll and every attack. There's so much more that I could say about this game, and yet at the same time, there's not much. I'm still scratching my head as to how this game became such a classic, and sparked an entirely new genre, forever changing the video game landscape. Every time I sat down to play, I went into it, and I wanted to love it. I was waiting, begging for that moment. I felt a sense of accomplishment and victory, but that hopeful optimism was always crushed a short time into each session, as time and time again, I became frustrated by some hurdle I didn't know how to surmount, or an enemy I didn't know how to kill. If it wasn't for my friend holding my hand through the whole experience, I would never have finished this game, and would have spent a couple hundred hours in it before finally beating the final boss. In the end, there is only one major point that I believe could be the reason I did not enjoy this game as much as I could have. I don't think I explored as much as I should have. Mind you, I did do a lot of exploring, but most often only after the prompting of my friend who was guiding me through the game. The painted world with the crossbreed boss, I would never have uncovered if he hadn't told me to get there. Now, part of the reason for my lack of exploration in Dark Souls is Dark Souls' fault, because there are a lot of locations or items that bring you to other locations that are just never explained. Sometimes it was my own fault for not reading a key's description, but other times the item's description was so vague it could be just about used anywhere. But not all secret areas required a specific item to find. Some were behind invisible walls, but the text people placed down often revealed where those were anyways. Even so, I'm fairly certain I did miss many locations in this game, and would have missed far more if I hadn't been told to go there. This exploration was often necessary in order to find NPCs or souls or other valuable items. This isn't to say I didn't explore on my own entirely, but I can't help but think that if my mindset had been turned more towards treating Dark Souls as an exploration game rather than a combat game, that I might have enjoyed it much better. Rather than rushing back to a boss room over and over again, I could have walked up to every door just to see what might be behind it. This may have also changed my mindset from thinking of bosses as an obnoxious obstacle I can't surpass to more of an eventual challenge I'd return to later. But as much as I think exploring could have helped with my enjoyment, I still only have so many hours in the day and can only spend so long on any given game. I do have a job and I want to get videos out on these games at some point. I'm not saying that this is why I didn't particularly enjoy the game, but I am saying that it did have an impact. And I can't help but wonder whether the average adult is, well, I guess an average gamer, or is an average gamer not an adult? Because an average adult, would they be able to view Dark Souls as a casual pastime? Would they see it as a game they can easily sink 100 hours to over the course of a year, while a gamer can view it as something that they can spend 100 hours in, but over the course of 2 days? I can't help but wonder whether the person who has that job, if they would get frustrated by this game and never being able to reach its endpoint, would they have a problem with that? Would they get frustrated with their lack of progress, that over the course of weeks they might not beat a single boss? I don't know. I know I personally view most things in life as a race to the finish, but as of late, I've been trying to see the beauty in taking things slow in games. It's just that being a YouTuber isn't often conducive to being slow. I did agree that I'd play Dark Souls 2 with my friend, so I'll have to see if these lessons I've learned from the first game will impact my experience with that game. Although a video on that probably won't come out for another year at my pace. but we'll see. Dark Souls is a game I just don't understand, and although I had theories as to why I hated it, all they are theories until I put them to the test. I'm sure many in the Dark Souls community will respond to this video with good, and maybe they're right, but Dark Souls sits as my least favorite game of all time and is a mile behind second worst. I never want to play this game, I never want to open it again. But at the same time, I do still really want to understand why so many people have such a love for this game.